Randy, still engrossed in treating the wounded, glanced up as explosions echoed in the distance, his gut twisted with worry. Zeke and Jax should have been back by now, he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Zara stood beside him, her insectoid features twitching with unease. If the command post falls, the Loyalists will bring in reinforcements. We won't survive that. Randy clenched his jaw. We'll hold out. That's what humans do. His voice carried the weight of countless battles fought and survived against impossible odds. He knew they were on borrowed time, but abandoning the rebels now wasn't an option. Suddenly, a communicator crackled. Jax's voice, ragged and strained, broke through. We're pinned down, Randy. Need extraction, fast. Randy cursed under his breath. He activated his comm. Hold tight, Jax. We're coming for you. Turning to Zara, he nodded. Ready? Her compound eyes locked with his, a silent agreement passing between them. Always. Together, they sprinted through the chaos outside, weaving between artillery strikes and crumbling buildings. Randy's mind raced. He couldn't afford to lose his crew, or the trust of these rebels. They were all in this together now. As they neared the command post, they spotted Zeke and Jax taking cover behind a shattered wall, plasma bolts cutting through the air above them. Loyalist troops were closing in fast. Randy wasted no time, motioning to Zara. On 3, we flank them. With precision and deadly accuracy, Randy and Zara took positions, firing at the Loyalists from behind. The sudden assault threw the enemies off balance. Randy's pulse pounded as the last Loyalist dropped, leaving the street eerily silent. Zeke pushed himself up, grinning through the soot and sweat. Cutting it close, boss. Randy slapped him on the back, eyes scanning the horizon. Just another day in the void. But the reprieve was short-lived. The ground shook beneath them as an enormous Loyalist cruiser appeared on the horizon, descending toward the battlefield. Its ominous shadows stretched across the war-torn city, and the message was clear. This fight was far from over. Zara's voice trembled slightly. That's it, the weapon. Randy's fists clenched. This was the galaxy's last hope, or its doom. Randy crouched behind a smoldering piece of debris, scanning the battlefield ahead. The rebel base was in chaos, smoke rising from artillery impacts as Loyalist forces pushed closer. The sounds of war, the distant rumble of explosions and the whine of plasma fire filled the air. His crew was out there somewhere, fighting for their lives. Zara, Randy called, pulling the insectoid Marin from her thoughts. We need to get these supplies to the command post. Without them, the rebels don't stand a chance. Zara nodded, her antennae twitching nervously. The Loyalists are closing in faster than expected. We don't have much time. They hurried through the wrecked streets, dodging falling rubble and ducking beneath shattered walls. All around them, rebel fighters were holding off the advancing Loyalist troops, but they were outgunned and outmanned. Reaching the command post, Randy shoved open the heavy doors, revealing a chaotic scene within. Rebel officers shouted commands, scrambling to hold together their crumbling defenses. A large holomap projected the battlefield, red markers representing Loyalist forces inching dangerously close. Who's in charge here? Randy barked. A weary-looking Marin officer, his carapace chipped and scorched, turned to face them. Captain Zira, you're the human mercenaries Vega promised. That's us, Randy replied, dropping the crate of medical supplies at the officer's feet. Where do you need these? Zira's compound eyes scanned the crate before gesturing to a group of medics in the corner. Get these to the field hospitals. We're running low on everything. As the medics moved in to take the supplies, Randy pulled Zira aside. We've got bigger problems. The Loyalists have a weapon, something capable of wiping out entire star systems. If they deploy it, this fight will be over before it even begins. Zira's expression hardened. We heard rumors about it, but nothing concrete. What do you know? Not enough, Randy admitted. But I've got a crew out there trying to disrupt their command center. We'll need every bit of firepower you've got to hold them off while we figure out how to stop that weapon. Zara nodded. We'll hold them, but you better make it quick. We're not built for long sieges. Outside, the thunder of artillery grew louder, the ground trembling beneath Randy's feet. The Loyalists were closing in. Zara, Randy said, turning to his companion, get word to Vega and the others. We need to rendezvous and hit that weapon hard before they use it. Zara nodded, her mandibles clicking in determination. I'll signal them. As she worked the comms, Randy grabbed his rifle and moved to the front line. He had led his crew through countless battles, but this one felt different. The stakes were higher, the risk greater, but he wasn't about to let that stop him. Meanwhile, on the far side of the city, Vega, Zeke, and Jax crouched behind a series of barricades, watching as Loyalist troops marched towards the rebel defenses. The command center loomed just ahead, heavily fortified and crawling with soldiers. We're going to have to go through them, Jax growled, his eyes scanning the area for weaknesses. Vega's mandibles clicked in frustration. They've tripled their forces. We won't last 5 minutes in a direct assault. Zeke smirked, pulling out a small device from his satchel. That's why we're not going in guns blazing. This little beauty will knock out their entire security grid. We'll slip in while they're blind. Jax raised an eyebrow. And if it doesn't work? Zeke's grin widened. Then we improvise. As the device activated, the lights flickered throughout the command center. Sirens blared as the security systems failed, and chaos erupted among the Loyalist troops. Go, Vega ordered. The three of them sprinted towards the command center, weaving between barricades and dodging enemy fire. Plasma bolts sizzled past, but they kept moving, their goal clear. Inside the command center, the disruption Zeke had caused was in full effect. Loyalist officers shouted orders, trying to restore order as systems malfunctioned left and right. We need to find the weapon controls, Vega said, leading the way through the maze of corridors. Zeke's fingers flew over the nearest terminal, accessing the security system. I've got it. Level 5, sub-basement. That's where they're keeping the big guns. As they made their way down, Jax paused, his keen senses picking up something off. We've got company. Before they could react, a squad of Loyalist soldiers rounded the corner, weapons drawn. Plasma fire erupted, and the narrow hallway became a death trap. Jax, ever the quick shot, returned fire, taking down 2 soldiers in rapid succession. Vega moved with the agility of his species, dodging blasts and returning fire with precision. Zeke, crouching behind a terminal, shouted, "We can't hold this position. We need to move." Vega nodded. This way. They pushed forward, plasma bolts ricocheting off the walls as they fought their way deeper into the command center. The closer they got, the more intense the resistance became. Finally, they reached the sub-basement. A massive door stood before them, sealed with heavy locks. "Zeke, can you get us in?" Vega asked. Zeke grinned, pulling out another device. "You bet I can." The locks clicked open, and the door slid aside, revealing a massive chamber. In the center of the room stood a towering weapon, unlike anything they had ever seen. Jax whistled. That thing could take out a planet. Zeke moved to the control console. "We've got to shut it down." As he worked, the sound of boots echoed down the hallway. More Loyalist troops were closing in. "We're out of time," Jax growled, gripping his rifle. "Zeke, you better work fast." Zeke's fingers danced over the console, sweat beading on his forehead. "Almost there." The control panel beeped, and the weapons systems powered down. The threat was neutralized for now. "We did it," Vega said, exhaling in relief. But their victory was short-lived. As they turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. "Looks like we've got more company," Jax muttered. Back at the Rebel command post, Randy's comm crackled to life. "Randy, it's Vega. We've shut down the weapon, but we're pinned. We need extraction, fast." Randy cursed under his breath. Hang tight. I'm coming for you. Turning to Zira, he said, I need every available fighter on that command center. We've got to get my crew out of there. Zira nodded. You'll have your support. But once we make our move, there's no going back. Randy strapped on his helmet, a grim smile forming on his lips. I never planned on going back. As he rallied his troops and prepared for the final push, one thing was clear. The fight for action wasn't over yet. And Randy wasn't about to let his crew, or the galaxy, down. The battle for survival, for hope, and for freedom had only just begun. The skies over Action were a violent cascade of explosions and streaking plasma fire as the rebels fought to hold their ground against the Loyalist assault. Fighter craft darted across the battlefield, engaged in deadly aerial duels, while tanks and artillery bombarded the city's already broken skyline. Randy stood atop a makeshift command tower, his visor reflecting the carnage below. The rebel forces were stretched thin, their defenses crumbling as wave after wave of Loyalist troops poured in. He could feel the pressure mounting. Time was running out, and his crew was still trapped deep within the Loyalist command center. Zira, Randy barked into his comm. I need those airstrikes now. We won't last another hour at this rate. Zira's voice crackled through the earpiece. Our bombers are pinned down. The Loyalists have anti-aircraft cannons set up across the Eastern District. We can't clear the skies until those are taken out. Randy cursed under his breath. Of course, it couldn't be easy. Nothing ever was. All right, I'll take care of it. Just get those bombers ready. When I give the signal, I want this place lit up. Zira responded with a weary sigh. We'll be ready. Randy turned to Zara, who was checking the ammunition supply. We've got a problem, he said, loading his rifle. Anti-air cannons on the east side are pinning down our bombers. We need to take them out, or the air support won't make it. Zara's antennae twitched as she considered their options. That sector's crawling with Loyalists. We'll need a distraction to get close. Randy grinned, his eyes gleaming with reckless determination. Distraction? I think I can handle that. Meanwhile, deep inside the Loyalist command center, Vega, Jax, and Zeke huddled behind a bank of consoles, their situation growing more dire by the second. The weapon was disabled, but they were trapped inside the sub-basement, and the Loyalists were closing in fast. Jax peered through a crack in the door, his sharp eyes scanning the hallway. They've got us surrounded. We're going to need a miracle to get out of this one. Zeke, still sweating from his work on the control panel, was furiously trying to hack into the security systems. I'm working on it. If I can just get these doors open. Forget the doors, Vega interrupted, his mandibles clicking in frustration. We need an exit now. Randy's on his way, but we've got to meet him halfway, or we're done for. Jax growled in agreement, gripping his plasma rifle. Then let's make our own exit. Without waiting for a response, the hulking warrior pulled a series of small explosive charges from his pack. Get clear, he muttered as he placed them against the far wall. The explosion rocked the room, debris flying as the wall crumbled to reveal a narrow maintenance tunnel. Jax grinned, pleased with his handiwork. Not pretty, but it'll do. Vega gestured for Zeke to move. Let's go. This tunnel should take us to the surface. The three of them squeezed into the tunnel, the distant sound of Loyalist boots and barking orders fading as they hurry through the cramped passage. Back on the surface, Randy and Zara led a small strike team through the ruins of the Eastern District. The Loyalist anti-aircraft cannons loomed ahead, towering over the crumbling buildings like sentinels of destruction. They crouched behind a pile of debris, surveying the scene. The cannons were heavily guarded by squads of Loyalist soldiers, their patrols tight and disciplined. Those guns are too well protected for a frontal assault, Zara whispered, her compound eyes flicking from target to target. We need another way in. Randy's gaze narrowed as he considered their options. We'll split up. I'll draw their fire from the north side, while you and the others move in from the east. Once you're close enough, plant the charges and blow those cannons sky high. Zara hesitated, her antennae twitching nervously. That's suicide, Randy. You won't survive a direct assault. Randy smirked, his eyes glinting with determination. I've been in worse spots. Just get the job done, Zara. I'll see you on the other side. Without waiting for a reply, Randy sprinted toward the north side, weaving through the debris as loyalist soldiers shouted in alarm. Plasma bolts whizzed past him, but he kept moving, his rifle spitting fire as he cut down anyone who got in his way. The loyalists took the bait. Within moments, the guards had shifted their focus to Randy's location, leaving the eastern approach vulnerable. Zara and her team moved quickly, slipping through the shadows as Randy's distraction drew the bulk of the enemy forces away. They reached the base of the first cannon, Zara placing a series of charges along its supports. Charges set, she whispered into her comm. Onto the next one. In the maintenance tunnel, Vega, Jax, and Zeke were making slow but steady progress. The cramped space forced them to move single file, their weapons held close as they navigated the dark, twisting corridors. Suddenly, the tunnel widened, opening up into an old utility room filled with long-abandoned equipment. Jax sniffed the air, his expression darkening. Something's not right. Before anyone could react, the door to the utility room burst open, and a squad of loyalist soldiers stormed in, weapons raised. Ambush. Vega shouted, diving for cover as plasma fire erupted around them. Jax roared, returning fire with brutal efficiency, his shots tearing through the loyalist ranks. Zeke ducked behind a control panel, frantically working his terminal to find an escape route. We're pinned down, Vega growled, his mandibles clicking in frustration. We need to get out of here now. Zeke's fingers danced over the keys. There's a service hatch on the far side of the room. If we can get to it, we'll have a way out. Jax fired another volley, taking down 2 more soldiers. Go, I'll cover you. Vega and Zeke sprinted for the hatch, ducking behind cover as Jax laid down suppressing fire. Plasma bolts ricocheted off the walls, the air thick with the smell of burning metal. Zeke reached the hatch first, prying it open with a grunt. It's clear. Let's go. Vega was halfway across the room when a plasma bolt caught him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground with a pained hiss. Vega. Jax roared, charging forward to drag his comrade to safety. They tumbled through the hatch, sealing it behind them, just as more loyalist soldiers stormed the room. That was too close, Zeke muttered, his voice shaky. Vega grunted in pain, clutching his wounded shoulder. We're not out of this yet. Back at the anti-aircraft cannons, Randy's diversion was wearing thin. He had taken out several loyalists, but their numbers were overwhelming, and he was quickly running out of cover and ammo. Zara, how's it going? He called into his comm, ducking behind a fallen pillar as plasma fire rained down around him. Charges are set, Zara replied. We're moving to a safe distance now. Randy exhaled in relief. Good. Blow it when you're clear. I'll meet you back at the rendezvous point. As Zara and her team retreated, Randy made a break for it, sprinting through the wreckage as loyalist forces closed in on his position. He had barely made 100 meters when the first explosion rocked the ground beneath his feet. The anti-aircraft cannon erupted in a ball of fire and debris, the shockwave sending loyalist troops flying. Seconds later, the second cannon followed, its destruction lighting up the sky as a cheer went up from the rebel forces. Air support is clear. Zara's voice crackled through Randy's comm. Bombers incoming. Randy grinned, wiping the sweat from his brow. About damn time. High above, the rebel bombers swooped in, their payloads raining down on the loyalist forces. Explosions tore through the enemy lines, and the tide of battle began to turn. But Randy wasn't done yet. His crew was still out there, and he wasn't about to leave them behind. Vega, Jax, and Zeke had finally made it to the surface, emerging from the service hatch into the war-torn streets of Axim. The sound of battle was deafening, but the sight of the rebel bombers in the sky filled them with hope. "We're close," Zeke said, checking his navpad. "The rendezvous point is just a few blocks away." They moved quickly, ducking through alleyways and side streets to avoid loyalist patrols. The city was a ruin, but the rebels were fighting back with renewed vigor. As they neared the rendezvous point, a familiar voice crackled through their comms. "Vega, this is Randy. Where the hell are you?" Vega grinned, despite the pain in his shoulder. "We're almost there. Had a little trouble getting out, but we're on our way." "Well, hurry it up," Randy replied. The rebel bombers rolled overhead, their engines shaking the very ground as they dropped payload after payload on the retreating loyalist forces. The sky was lit with brilliant flashes of orange and yellow as the loyalist anti-aircraft cannons were obliterated, leaving the city of Axiom a smoking ruin. Yet, amidst the carnage, there was hope. The rebels had gained a crucial foothold, and Randy knew this was their moment to strike back. But the battle was far from over. Randy and Zara regrouped with what remained of their strike team in the crumbled remains of a once grand cathedral. The stained glass had long since shattered, and the stone pillars that once supported the vaulted ceiling now lay in rubble. It was a solemn place, an ancient reminder of Axiom's former glory. "Status report," Randy barked, pacing as he took stock of their remaining forces. Zara, wiping grime and blood from her face, crouched by a map they had hastily unfurled on the cracked marble floor. "We lost about 40% of our forces in that last push. The Loyalists hit us hard, but thanks to the airstrikes, they're falling back." "Casualties." Randy's voice was rough, already anticipating the worst. "Heavy," Zara replied, her compound eyes scanning the faces of the surviving soldiers. "But the troops are still willing to fight. Morale's high after we took out the cannons. They believe we can win this." Randy clenched his fist, staring at the map. Axiom was in ruins, but its strategic importance remained clear. If they could hold the city, they'd have a staging point for future strikes against the Loyalists' main forces. But to do that, they had to secure one last location: the Loyalist command center buried beneath the city's central district. "Zira," Randy called into his comm, "what's the status on the Loyalist reinforcements?" Zira's voice crackled in response. "It's not good. They're bringing in additional troops from their forward bases. We estimate we have a few hours, maybe less, before they mount a counterattack. If we're going to make a move on the command center, we need to do it now." Randy nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "All right, we go for it. Zara, take half the remaining forces and set up a defensive perimeter around the central district. We need to hold the line while we take the command center. I'll take the rest of the troops and make the push." Zara nodded, her expression determined. "Understood. We'll give them hell." Randy gave her a firm nod before turning to the troops that had gathered around them. Some were battered and bruised, their armor scorched and dented, but their eyes gleamed with fierce resolve. "Listen up," Randy shouted, drawing their attention. "We've come too far to stop now. We've crippled their defenses, and we've taken the fight to their doorstep. Now we finish what we started. We take that command center, and we make sure the Loyalists never set foot in this city again." A cheer rose from the soldiers, their voices echoing through the shattered cathedral. Randy's heart swelled with pride. These weren't just soldiers, they were survivors, fighters who had clawed their way through every obstacle thrown at them. And they weren't about to back down now. As Randy led his team through the war-torn streets of Axiom, the sounds of distant explosions and gunfire echoed around them. The city was a maze of collapsed buildings, twisted metal, and smoking debris. What had once been a thriving metropolis was now a graveyard. Zara's voice came through the comms. "We're in position. Perimeter is set up. We've got scouts keeping an eye on the main roads, and we'll report any movement. The Loyalists won't get through without a fight." "Good work," Randy replied. "We're about to enter the central district. Keep us updated." The central district of Axiom had once been the heart of the city. Towering skyscrapers and ornate structures lined the streets, though now they stood as hollow shells, their windows shattered, and their walls blackened by fire. At the center of it all was the Loyalist Command Center, a towering, heavily fortified bunker built into the very foundation of the city. It was here that the Loyalists controlled their entire operation, and it was here that Randy would bring the fight. "Keep low and stay quiet," Randy ordered as they approached the outer defenses. "We don't want to alert them until we're inside." His squad moved with practiced precision, slipping through the rubble and debris like shadows. The closer they got to the command center, the heavier the Loyalist presence became. Patrols of armored soldiers roamed the streets, and automated turrets scanned the area, their sensors sweeping back and forth. Randy signaled for his squad to halt, his eyes narrowing as he studied the defenses. "We've got turrets on the rooftops and heavy patrols around the perimeter. This isn't going to be easy." A soldier beside him, a grizzled veteran named Tarek, grunted in agreement. "They've got this place locked down tight. We'll never make it through the front entrance." Randy smirked. "We're not going through the front." He pointed toward a narrow alley that ran along the side of the command center. "We'll make our way through there, hit the back entrance. It's less guarded, and we'll have the element of surprise." Tarek raised an eyebrow. "And if we run into resistance?" "We improvise," Randy replied, his voice steady. "Just stick to the plan." The squad moved out, slipping into the alleyway and creeping toward the rear of the command center. As they approached, Randy could see the back entrance, a reinforced door guarded by a pair of Loyalist soldiers and a single automated turret. "All right, here's how we're going to do this," Randy whispered to his squad. "Tarek, take out the turret with an EMP. Jara, you and I will take out the guards. The rest of you, be ready to move in as soon as we're clear." Tarek nodded, pulling a small EMP grenade from his belt. He tossed it toward the turret, and a second later, it let out a sharp crackle as its systems shut down. At the same moment, Randy and Jara moved in, the silenced weapons spitting out 2 quick shots that dropped the guards before they had a chance to react. "Move," Randy ordered, and the squad rushed toward the door. Zeke, their tech specialist, quickly moved to the control panel. His fingers flew across the keys as he bypassed the security systems. "Got it." Zeke grinned, stepping back as the door slid open. The squad entered the command center, moving swiftly through the narrow corridors. The interior was a stark contrast to the chaos outside, clean, sterile, and eerily quiet. But Randy knew that wouldn't last long. They moved deeper into the command center, making their way toward the central control room. It was here that the Loyalist leaders coordinated their operations, and it was here that Randy intended to strike the killing blow. As they approached the control room, Randy held up a fist, signaling the squad to halt. He could hear voices inside, Loyalist officers barking orders, unaware that their enemies were just outside the door. "On my signal," Randy whispered, his hand hovering over the door controls. He counted down silently, 3, 2, 1. The door slid open, and Randy's squad surged into the room, weapons raised. The Loyalist officers barely had time to react before they were cut down in a hail of gunfire. It was over in seconds. Randy strode to the central console, his eyes scanning the rows of blinking monitors and control panels. "Zeke, get over here. Shut it all down." Zeke moved quickly, his hands flying over the controls. Within moments, the screens went dark, and the command center's systems powered down. "It's done," Zeke said, turning to Randy. Randy nodded, a grim satisfaction settling over him. They had done it. The Loyalists' control over action was broken. But even as the thought crossed his mind, a sudden explosion rocked the command center, sending Randy and his squad sprawling to the ground. "What the hell was that?" Jara shouted, scrambling to her feet. Randy's heart sank as he realized what had happened. The Loyalists had rigged the command center to blow, a failsafe in case they lost control. "Everyone, get out." Randy ordered, his voice urgent. "This place is coming down." The squad bolted for the exit, but the walls were already beginning to collapse, chunks of debris crashing down around them. Randy led the way, his heart pounding in his chest as they sprinted through the collapsing corridors. Behind him, the command center was disintegrating, the explosions growing louder and more violent with each passing second. They reached the exit just as the entire structure began to cave in. Randy and his squad dove through the door, tumbling into the streets as the command center collapsed in a massive cloud of dust and debris. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, Randy pushed himself to his feet, coughing as he wiped the dust from his face. Around him, his squad was doing the same, battered but alive. Zora's voice crackled through the comm. "Randy, what's your status? We heard the explosions." Randy took a deep breath, glancing back at the smoldering ruins of the command center. "It's over. The command center is down." There was a pause, then Zora's voice came through, full of relief. "Good work. The Loyalists are in full retreat. We've won." Randy smiled grimly. "For now." As he looked out over the ruined city of Axiom, Randy knew that the battle was far from over. The Loyalists would regroup and the war would continue. But for now, they had dealt a critical blow, and Axiom was in rebel hands. And Randy would be ready for whatever came next. The sun barely pierced the thick layers of smoke that hung over Axiom, casting the city in a permanent twilight. Randy and his team emerged from the wreckage of the command center, their breath heavy with the stench of ash and sweat. The city was theirs, but victory was not enough to banish the weight of what had been lost. "Zora, give me a sitrep on the rest of the city," Randy commanded, his voice hoarse from the smoke and chaos. Her reply came through quickly, clear despite the distant echo of gunfire. "We've secured most of the central district, but Loyalist forces are still holding out in the northern sector. Reinforcements are inbound, 3 heavy divisions according to Zira's intelligence. We've got maybe an hour before they hit us." Randy swore under his breath. "We don't have the manpower to hold out against 3 full divisions." Zora's tone was grim. "Not unless we pull off a miracle." Randy knew they needed more than a miracle. They needed an advantage. His mind raced through possibilities. They had broken the Loyalists' command, and their supply lines were in disarray. But brute force wasn't going to hold the city. They needed something else, something the Loyalists didn't expect. And then it hit him. "Zora, remember the old power grid? The underground one they built before the orbital solar stations." Zora was silent for a moment, then her voice returned, sharper. "You're talking about the dormant energy conduits. You think they're still active?" "I think they are. Axiom was built on layers of tech long before the orbital platforms were established. If we can tap into that grid, we could turn the whole city's infrastructure against the Loyalists, flood them with electricity, disable their tech, cut off their communications." "That's a gamble, Randy. We don't even know if those systems are functional after the bombardments." Randy grit his teeth, looking around at his squad and the broken city they fought so hard to protect. "It's the only gamble we've got. If we sit here and wait, we'll get crushed. We need to make this city fight for us." Zora was silent for a moment, weighing the risks. Finally, she spoke. "All right, I'll get Zira to pull up whatever data we have on the old conduits. But if you're going through with this, you'll need to get to the main junction station. That's where the grid ties into the city's systems." "I know," Randy said, his voice firm. "I'll take a team and head there now. In the meantime, you prepare for the defense. If this works, it could buy us the time we need." "Got it. Be careful out there." Randy motioned to Tarek and the rest of his squad, briefing them quickly on the plan. They didn't question his judgment, though he could see the concern in their eyes. The junction station was deep in the heart of the city's old infrastructure, a place few had ventured in decades. "Let's move out," Randy ordered, and they set off, navigating through the crumbling streets of Axiom. As they made their way toward the outskirts of the city's central district, the devastation grew even worse. Entire buildings had been reduced to rubble, streets cracked and warped by the relentless bombardments, and bodies, too many to count, littered the ground, victims of both loyalist and rebel fire. But Randy's thoughts were laser-focused on the plan. The conduits had been built long ago, part of an ambitious project to power Axiom without reliance on solar energy. But as the city expanded and newer technologies emerged, the underground grid was abandoned, left dormant beneath the surface. They reached the entrance to the old power tunnels, a massive reinforced door hidden beneath the debris of a collapsed building. Randy and his team dug through the rubble, uncovering the door and prying it open with the help of a small fusion cutter. Inside, the tunnel was cold and dark, the walls lined with long-dead wiring and rusted metal supports. The air was thick with dust, and the only sounds were the echoes of their footsteps as they descended deeper into the city's underbelly. "Stay sharp," Randy warned as they pressed forward, their weapons drawn. "We don't know what's down here." They moved cautiously, their lights cutting through the darkness. Every so often, they would pass an old terminal or a control panel, long since powered down and abandoned. It was like walking through the forgotten history of the city, a time when Axiom was a beacon of progress, not a war zone. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the junction station. It was a massive chamber, filled with old consoles and massive generators that hummed faintly with the residual energy still stored in the conduit. Zeke, that tech specialist, immediately went to work, setting up a connection to the old systems. "Give me a few minutes," he muttered as he cracked open one of the consoles and started rewiring the circuits. "This tech is ancient, but I think I can get it running." The rest of the squad fanned out, securing the room and keeping watch for any signs of loyalist patrols. Randy couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Every second spent down here was a second closer to the loyalists launching their full-scale assault on Zora's position. "Zeke, how's it going?" Randy called over, his voice tense. "I'm almost there," Zeke replied, his fingers dancing across the keys. This system was built to withstand almost anything. Whoever designed it knew their stuff. "I just need tow." Zeke's words were cut off by a sudden sharp beat from the console. Lights flickered across the room, and the generators began to hum louder, as if waking from a long sleep. "I've got it," Zeke shouted triumphantly. "The grid is powering up. I'm routing the energy through the city's infrastructure now. We'll be able to overload the loyalist systems as soon as they hit the perimeter." Randy felt a surge of hope, but it was short-lived. A loud crash echoed through the tunnels, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots on metal. Loyalist forces had found them. "We've got company," Tarek yelled, raising his rifle as a group of loyalist soldiers poured into the junction station, their weapons blazing. Randy and his squad dove for cover, returning fire as the loyalists advanced. The air was thick with the crackle of gunfire and the sharp smell of burning metal. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but Randy wasn't about to let them die here. "Hold the line," Randy shouted, firing at a loyalist who had taken cover behind one of the generators. "Zeke, how much longer?" "Almost there," Zeke called back, his hands flying over the console as he tried to maintain control of the grid. Randy's heart pounded as he ducked behind cover, firing at the advancing loyalists. The fight was brutal, close quarters, and chaotic. His squad was holding their own, but they couldn't last forever. They needed to get out of here before they were overwhelmed. "Zeke, now or never," Randy shouted, his voice strained as a loyalist bullet ricocheted off the metal beside him. "Got it," Zeke shouted back. "The grid is live. I've set it to overload their systems as soon as they enter the city." "Then let's get out of here," Randy ordered, his voice filled with urgency. The squad fought their way back toward the entrance, bullets whizzing past them as the loyalists pressed the attack. Randy took down 2 more soldiers, his rifle kicking in his hands as he cleared the path for his team. They burst out of the tunnel just as an explosion rocked the chamber behind them. the power grid going into full overload. The ground trembled as the energy coursed through the city's infrastructure, and Randy could only hope it was enough. Outside, the battle was already raging. The Loyalist reinforcements had arrived, and the rebel forces were holding them back as best they could. Zora's perimeter was barely holding, and it was clear they were on the brink of being overrun. But then something incredible happened. As the Loyalist forces pushed forward, their tanks and walkers suddenly ground to a halt. Their communications went dark, and their targeting systems flickered out. Panic spread through their ranks as their advanced technology turned against them, overloaded by the surge of energy coursing through the city's systems. "What the hell's happening?" One of the Loyalist officers shouted as his mech sputtered and sparked, the control panels frying in a cascade of sparks. Randy watched from a distance, a grim smile on his face. The gamble had paid off. "Zora," Randy called into his comm, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "The grid's live. Their systems are down. Now's your chance." Zora didn't need any further encouragement. "You heard him," she shouted to her troops. "Push forward. Take them down while they're blind." The rebels surged forward, their voices raised in a battle cry as they charged the crippled Loyalist forces. Without their advanced tech to support them, the Loyalists were forced into disarray, their lines collapsing as the rebels pushed through with overwhelming force. The tide had turned. Hours later, as the dust began to settle and a last of the Loyalist forces were either captured or retreating, Randy stood atop a ruined building, surveying the battlefield. The city of Action was in ruins, but it was theirs. For the moment, the rebels had won. Zora approached, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "You did it, Randy. That was one hell of a gamble, but it paid off." Randy nodded, though his face remained grim. "We won today, but the war's not over. They'll be back, and they'll come with everything they've got next time." Zora sighed, looking out over the broken city. "Then we'll be ready." Randy glanced at her, his expression hard but determined. "We don't have a choice." The battle for Action was over, but the war for humanity's future was only just beginning. The streets of Action were eerily quiet in the aftermath of the battle. Smoke still curled from the ruins, and the distant sounds of firefights echoed sporadically, but for the moment, the city was in rebel hands. Randy walked through the central district, surveying the destruction, his thoughts heavy. His team had performed miracles, but he knew this victory was temporary. The Loyalists wouldn't allow Action to remain in rebel control for long. Their technological advantage had been neutralized for now, but it was only a matter of time before they adapted. Randy stopped in front of an old monument, one of the few structures still standing. It had been built to honor the city's founders, now scarred and pockmarked from the fighting. He ran his hand over the cold stone, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. "We did what we had to." Zora's voice came from behind him, soft but firm. She stepped up beside him, her gaze fixed on the ruins. "I know," Randy replied, his voice low. "But at what cost? We've lost too many, and the Loyalists will come back with a vengeance." Zora didn't flinch. "We'll be ready. You've given us time. We've proven that even with all their tech, they can be beaten." Randy turned to her, his face lined with exhaustion. "Time is all we've bought, Zora, and time isn't enough to win a war." Zora met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "It's a start." A silence fell between them, broken only by the distant rumble of vehicles moving through the streets. The rebels were regrouping, tending to the wounded, and preparing for whatever came next. But Randy couldn't shake the feeling that they were living on borrowed time. "What's the next move?" Zora asked, folding her arms. Randy stayed out at the horizon, the dark clouds overhead casting long shadows over the city. "We strengthen our defenses, consolidate our forces, and prepare for the counterattack. We need to gather more allies, secure more resources. This city is just one battle in a much larger war." Zora nodded, "And we've sent a message. The galaxy now knows that Action won't fall so easily." Randy gave a slight nod in agreement. But we'll need more than just defiance. We need a plan, a long-term strategy. Zara smiled slightly. Well, I hear you're pretty good at those. Randy smirked, but the weight of responsibility bore down on him. Let's hope I've got one more miracle left. As they stood there, the wind carrying the distant sounds of the rebuilding effort, Randy knew that the real fight was yet to come. They had bought themselves a fragile moment of peace, but the storm was still on the horizon. And when it came, they would have to be ready.